I want to start with the story. No name, no identifying details. Just a situation you might recognize. Her name, for our purposes, is Carol. She was 53 years old. She'd been married 26 years. She suspected something was wrong with her marriage for about 2 years before she even said a word out loud about it. She spent 2 years trying to fix it, going to therapy, being the bigger person, staying quiet at dinner, just not rocking the boat. And then one Thursday afternoon, she got served with divorce papers in her own kitchen. Her husband had been quietly preparing for about 8 months. He had already met with a lawyer. He had already moved money. He had already transferred assets. He had already changed beneficiaries on 2 life insurance policies. He had already rented an apartment. He already had a roadmap. Carol had dinner reservations for their anniversary next month. Now, I'm not telling you this story to scare you. I'm not telling you this story to make you suspicious of your spouse or to turn this into a paranoia podcast. This is not what this is. I'm telling you that story because Carol told it to me herself. And the part that wrecked her the most was not the divorce. It was the preparation gap. She said, and I will never forget this, I thought being a good person meant I didn't need to pay attention. I thought love was enough. I had no idea what I had, what I owned, what was mine, or what was gone. That gap, that preparation gap, that is what today's episode is about. Because here's what I know after years of coaching people through this process. Most people don't regret preparing too early. They regret preparing too late. Welcome to the Conscious Divorce Podcast. I'm Justin Milrad. I'm a certified divorce coach, an MBA, a financial planner, and the author of You 2.0, Divorce a Better Way Forward, and the founder of Reclaim and Reboot Transformational Divorce Coaching. I've lived through divorce myself. I've coached hundreds of people through it. And I built this podcast because I believe that how you move through divorce matters. The decisions you make before, during, and after this process will shape your life for the next decade, maybe even longer. Quick disclaimer. Before we dive in, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a financial advisor. Nothing in this episode constitutes legal, psychological, or financial advice. What I am is a strategist and a guide who has walked this road and helped a lot of people walk it better. Always work with the licensed professionals in those specific domains. What I can offer you today is context, framework, and clarity. And one quick thing before we get started. I do this work because I believe it matters. I volunteer a significant amount of my time to help people navigate one of the hardest transitions of their lives. If this podcast helps you, even one episode, even one insight, I would be genuinely grateful if you took 60 seconds to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're willing, write a short review. Reviews help real people find this show at the exact moment they need it most. That is not a small thing. That is something that's life-changing for many. So thank you in advance for that. Today's episode is called Before You File, the conscious divorce prep checklist no one talks about. And it's exactly what it sounds like. We're going to talk about the documents, the financial moves, the evidence awareness, and the mindset shifts that people almost always wish they had handled earlier. We're going to look at why preparation matters, how to do it without becoming cold or adversarial, and what you can actually do this week to get ahead of the chaos. This episode is for you whether you are seriously considering filing, whether you're in the early gray zone of I don't know yet, or whether you just had a conversation that left you wondering if I need to start paying attention differently. All those people belong here. The trap that no one talks about. Let me tell you what I think is the biggest invisible trap in divorce. It's not lawyers, it's not money, it's not even conflict, though conflict is expensive. The biggest invisible trap is the belief that being a good person means you don't have to think strategically. I hear this constantly. I don't want to be one of those people who turns everything into a war. I don't want to be sneaky. I want to keep things civil. And I want to say clearly, loudly, and directly, those are beautiful instincts. Don't lose them. But here's what those instincts are not. They are not a preparation strategy. They are a values assessment. You can be kind and organized. You can be decent and informed. You can be someone who wants to divorce with dignity and still knows exactly what accounts exist, what your monthly spending is, what your credit score is, and what's in your retirement fund. In fact, here's the truth that data supports. People who enter the divorce process informed and organized have better outcomes. They make fewer costly mistakes. They're less likely to panic and accept a bad settlement. They're less likely to get blindsided, and they're less likely to leave money or assets on the table that belong to them. The research on this is really clear. Financial disorganization during divorce is one of the top predictors of long-term economic distress, especially for the partner who is less financially engaged during the marriage. We also know from behavioral economics that when people are emotionally flooded, which divorce absolutely triggers, their decision-making degrades significantly. Stress hormones impair working memory. Fear narrows attention. Grief disorganizes thinking. So what does preparation do? It reduces the decision-making load at the worst possible moment. It gives you solid information to stand on when the ground feels unstable. It is not aggression, it is self-preservation. There is a phrase I use with my clients. Preparation is not aggression, it's clarity. Write that down if you need to. Say it out loud, because the alternative, showing up to one of the most significant financial and legal processes of your life without this information, is not kindness, it's exposure. So what does the research actually tell us? Before I get into the actual checklist, I want to spend a few minutes on the research layer, because I think understanding the why makes the what a lot easier to act on. Study after study on divorce outcomes shows a consistent pattern. People who engaged legal and financial professionals early had higher levels of satisfaction with their outcomes, even when the outcome was hard. Not because things went perfectly, because they understood what was happening. The American Psychological Association has done a significant body of work on how interparental conflict, meaning the conflict between the divorcing partners, affects children. And the finding that often surprises people is this: it's not the divorce itself that damages kids most. It's the level and exposure to conflict around the divorce. Children in high conflict marriages where the parents stay together often fare worse developmentally than children whose parents divorce with low conflict and strong co-parenting. What this means practically is that how you go through this process matters enormously for you, for your kids, for your future relationship with your ex. And preparation, real preparation, dramatically reduces reactive conflict. Because when you know your numbers, you don't panic at the negotiation table. When you have your documents, you don't cave under pressure because you're desperate to end the fight. When you've thought through your priorities in advance, you show up as a participant instead of a victim. The financial data is equally striking. Research from the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage and the various financial planning bodies consistently show that women on average experience a steeper post-divorce drop in household income than men. Men often recover faster financially, partly because they tend to be more engaged in the household financial picture during the marriage. This is not a universal rule, and it's changing with generational shifts, but the pattern is real enough that financial awareness before filing is one of the most gender-neutral protective moves anyone in marriage can make. One more piece of research worth flagging: out-of-court resolution, when appropriate, which includes mediation and collaborative divorce, consistently produce better outcomes on most measures: lower cost, lower time, lower conflict, higher rates of compliance with agreements. But, and this is critical, out-of-court resolution works best when both parties come to the table informed. It breaks down, sometimes catastrophically, when one party shows up uninformed and one party shows up prepared. The information asymmetry becomes a leverage problem. So preparation isn't just about protecting yourself. It's also about making any form of respectful resolution actually possible. Let me introduce you to someone I'm calling Ari. Ari was 47. He'd been married for 18 years. He was a successful operations director, traveled a lot for work, and had what he described as a pretty traditional household setup. His wife handled the finances. He handled the income. They had a system. When they decided to separate, both of them agreed to make it civil. Neither wanted war. His wife suggested a mediator they both liked. Ari went into the first mediation session feeling pretty good. He figured they had a modest amount of equity in their house, some retirement savings, 2 cars, and some credit card debt. He did not think it was going to be that complicated. What Ari didn't know, until mediation surfaced it, was that the previous 6 years, his wife had quietly been liquidating a joint investment account in small increments and depositing those funds into a separate account he didn't know existed. Not huge amounts, but over 6 years, it had added up to just over $40,000. He also didn't know that she had taken out a home equity line of credit 2 years earlier for $30,000 secured against the house they both owned and that the balance was still outstanding. He found that out when they pulled the property disclosures. His credit cards also had a combined balance significantly higher than he realized because he had not been opening the statements. He assumed they were paid off. They were not. None of this made his wife a monster. She had her own reasons, her own fears, her own sense of what was hers. This is complicated. People do things in the shadow of a failing marriage that they wouldn't do in the light of a good one. But here's what it meant for Ari. He sat in a mediation session across a table from someone who had been financially organized for years, trying to figure out in real time what the actual picture looked like. He didn't know his numbers. She did. And that asymmetry cost him not just money, time, and confidence. The sense that he was in control of his own story. He later told me, I walked into that room thinking I understood our finances. I walked out realizing I had been operating on a story I told myself for 2 decades. I had no idea what was real. That story is not rare. The details change. The dynamics repeat. All right, let's get practical. This is the section I want you to return to. This is the part where I go through the actual categories of documents and information you need to understand and in many cases preserve before you file or before things get messy. I'm going to walk through this in sections: financial records, property and assets, debts and liabilities, insurance and estate documents, and then what I call the shadow picture, which is the stuff that's harder to see but matters just as much. Financial records. Let's start with the most foundational thing: tax returns. You want the last 3 to 5 years of joint tax returns? Why? Because tax returns are a financial x-ray. They show income from all sources, including business income, rental income, capital gains, and dividends. They show deductions that may reflect expenses you didn't know about. They are the single most revealing document in most divorces. Get them. Download them from the IRS if you need to. Keep copies somewhere safe and outside the marital home. Next, bank statements. All accounts: checking, saving, money market. Go back at least 2 years. You're looking for patterns: regular transfers you don't recognize, unusual withdrawals, accounts you didn't even know existed showing up in connected transfers. In most states, marital funds that were somewhere mysterious during the marriage are still marital funds. Credit card statements, same principle, at least 2 years. You want to understand what the actual monthly spending picture looks like, not the version you assumed. You also want to know the current balances because you may be partially or fully responsible for joint credit card debt regardless of who made the purchases. Retirement accounts. List every retirement account that exists for both you and your spouse: 401ks, IRAs, pension plans, deferred compensation plans. In most states, the portion of a retirement account that grew during the marriage is considered a marital asset, even if the account is in one person's name. This is often where the significant hidden value lives, and it is also where people often make the mistake of treating retirement savings as off limits because it's my 401k. Legally, that is often not how it works. Investment accounts, brokerage accounts, stock options, RSUs, any employer equity. Get statements, understand what's vested, what's unvested, what is being sold, and when. The timing of sales and distributions matter. Real estate. Get the deed to every property you own, jointly or separately. Pull a current mortgage statement. Understand the market value as best as you can, which means a rough appraisal or comparable sales in your area. Understand the equity. Understand whether there are any liens, HELOCs, or second mortgages. Vehicles, titles, and current loan balances, if any. Business interests. This one is huge and often underestimated. If either spouse owns a business, has a stake in a closely held company, has a partnership interest, or has any ownership in an LLC, that business interest needs to be understood and potentially valued by a professional. Business valuation in divorce is one of the most complex and contested areas there is. The time to become aware of it is not during discovery, it's before you file. Debts and liabilities. Pull a credit report for both of you if possible. Know every account that exists in your name, jointly or separately. Know the balances. Know the history. Understand what you are legally on the hook for. Debt does not disappear in divorce. It gets divided. And in many states, if a joint debt is assigned to your spouse in your agreement and they don't pay it, the creditor can still come after you. Student loans, medical debt, personal loans, lines of credit, tax liabilities, know it exists. Insurance and estate documents. Life insurance policies. Who are the beneficiaries? Many people are shocked to discover that after decades of marriage, an ex-partner, an estranged parent, or an old designation they forgot about is still listed. You cannot necessarily change beneficiaries unilaterally once you file, depending on your state and whether temporary orders are in place, but you need to know what exists. Talk to your attorney about this. Health insurance. Understand who is covered under whose plan, what the options are for continued coverage after separation, and what the cost will look like. Disability insurance, long-term care policies, homeowners or renters insurance. Know what you have. Estate documents, wills, trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare proxies. These will all need to be updated after divorce, but you need to know what currently exists and what it says. The shadow picture. This is a category I call the shadow picture. These are the things that are harder to quantify but matter enormously. Monthly spending reality. Do you actually know what your household spends every month? Not your estimate, not what you wish it was, what it actually is. Track it. Pull bank and credit card statements and add it up. This number will be the foundation of every conversation about support, lifestyle, and post-divorce budgeting. I cannot overemphasize the importance of knowing what you spend on a monthly basis. Cash flow. Is there income coming into the household that isn't showing up in salary? Side income, freelance work, consulting, business revenue that runs through personal accounts? The divorce process will ask these questions. You should know the answers first. Passwords and account access. Make sure you have access to email, online banking, investment portals, insurance portals, and any account that matters. Once separation becomes official and communication breaks down, access can become a real problem. This is not about surveillance. It's about not being locked out of your own financial life. Credit awareness. Know your credit score. Know your credit history. Know which accounts are in your name or only, which are joint, and which you are an authorized user on. That last distinction matters because an authorized user has access but not legal responsibility. And losing access to those accounts could affect your immediate financial liquidity. The person who prepared early. Now, let me tell you a different kind of story. Her name for our purposes is Diana, 41 years old, married for 12 years, 2 kids. She had known for about 18 months that her marriage was probably not going to make it. She didn't know for certain. She had hoped. She had tried, but somewhere in her gut, she had a sense. So she did something most people in her situation don't do. She quietly, privately, over the course of several months, started getting organized. She set up a separate email account used only for financial and legal correspondence. She opened a personal checking account at a separate bank, funded it with money she had been earning independently, and made sure her paycheck was the only thing going into it. She downloaded 2 years of bank and credit card statements and saved them to a cloud folder only she had access to. She pulled her credit report and found an account she had forgotten about. She sat down with a spreadsheet one Saturday afternoon and figured out for the first time what her household actually spent every month. She made a list of every retirement account she knew of for both her and her husband. She also scheduled a 1-hour consultation with a family law attorney in her city, not to file, just to understand, to ask, if this happens, what am I looking at? What are my rights? What does the process look like here? When her husband eventually told her he wanted to divorce about 4 months later, Diana cried. Of course she did. It was still painful. Endings are painful. But she didn't panic. She didn't feel ambushed. She already knew what the landscape looked like. She already had professionals she trusted. She already understood her numbers. Her divorce took about 7 months. It was handled through mediation. The financial disclosures were not a source of anxiety for her because she had done her own version of them months earlier. She negotiated from a place of clarity instead of a place of fear. She later told me, the preparation didn't make the divorce easier emotionally, but it made it navigatable. I never felt like I was completely in the dark. That word, navigable, I love that word because divorce doesn't have to be a shipwreck. It can be a difficult crossing, and there is a difference. The evidence layer, smart ethical documentation. All right, now I want to talk about something that makes people uncomfortable. Evidence documentation. The word gathering in relation to someone you're still living with. Let me be direct about what this section is and what it's not. This is not a section about surveillance. It is not a section about installing tracking apps, reading someone's private messages without authorization, hiring a private investigator out of spite, or doing anything that's illegal, unethical, or that will blow up in your face in court. I want to be crystal clear about that. What this section is about is preserving facts before access disappears. Because in a divorce, access to information can close fast. Joint accounts get closed, passwords get changed, devices get wiped, email gets deleted, financial history gets restructured. This is not paranoia, it's just how the end of a life often unfolds in practice. It's incredible how many things get forgotten. So here's what smart ethical documentation looks like. Financial records, again. We've covered these, but I want to emphasize the preservation angle. If you have access to joint accounts, download statements now. If you have access to tax returns in an online portal, download them now. Not to hide them, not to destroy them, to preserve your access to your own shared financial history. Parenting logs. If children are involved, if custody is going to be a question, the documentation of who does what, who picks up, who drops off, who attends school events, who is present at doctor's appointments becomes. You don't have to turn this into a surveillance operation. You can simply start keeping a calendar and being intentional about noting your parenting involvement. Simple, clean, and factual. Text and email records. Most smartphones back up automatically to the cloud. Know where your messages are stored. If there are conversations that are relevant, particularly around financial agreements, parenting decisions, or events you want to be able to reference, know how to access them. Screenshots of relevant conversations saved somewhere private are not illegal in most contexts. What is potentially illegal varies by state, but generally, capturing your own conversations is permissible. Recording someone else's conversation without their knowledge may not be. Know your state's rules on recording or ask your attorney. If there are assets that belong to the marriage, like artwork, jewelry, collectibles, valuable items of any kind, document their existence. Photos, appraisals, if you have them, a simple inventory. Timeline documentation. This one matters more than people expect. A written timeline of significant events, dates, conversations, decisions, and agreements created close in time to when those things happened has weight. Your memory of what happened 2 years ago is less credible than notes you wrote at the time. Here's the bottom line on documentation. You're not building a case for war. You're preserving the record of your own life. That is a reasonable thing to do. The emotional mistakes that cost the most. Now let's talk about the other side of preparation, because the documents and the evidence, that's the tactical layer. But there is an equally important emotional and psychological layer that if you get wrong, will undermine everything else. These are the emotional mistakes I see most often in the clients I work with. The ones that are the most expensive, and I mean expensive literally and figuratively. Denial, the most costly emotional state in divorce. Denial looks like this. It probably won't get that bad. We're going to work this out. I don't need to prepare because I'm not actually going to do this. Denial is not hope. Hope is a forward-looking orientation. Denial is a backward-looking protection mechanism. It keeps you from preparing because preparing feels like accepting an outcome you're not ready to accept. The problem is that denial is not neutral. Every week you spend in denial while your spouse is preparing is a week of preparation gap. I've worked with people who waited 6 months to start gathering information because they couldn't bring themselves to accept what was coming. 6 months. Imagine what can change in a shared financial life in 6 months when one person is motivated and the other isn't paying attention. Wishful thinking about disclosure. This one is subtle. It sounds like we've agreed to be honest with each other about everything. And maybe you have, and maybe your spouse will honor that completely. But the divorce process has formal financial disclosure requirements for a reason. People's memories are imperfect. Their self-interest shapes what they volunteer. Their sense of what is marital versus mine is often very different from what the law says. Relying on voluntary honesty as your primary financial strategy is not trust. It's a risk assumption. Avoiding the numbers. I see this one constantly. Highly capable, professionally accomplished adults who are completely avoidant when it comes to their own household finances. They build companies, manage teams, navigated complex professional environments, and yet the idea of sitting down and knowing what they owe and what they have triggers something that feels almost physically impossible. Here's what I know about that. The avoidance is almost always worse than the knowledge. The imagined fear of what you might find is almost always more distressing than the actual numbers. And the cost of not knowing during a divorce is not abstract. It shows up in settlements, it shows up in legal fees, it shows up in decisions made from fear instead of information. Confusing kindness with passivity. This is the Carol mistake from the beginning of this episode. Being a good person does not require being uninformed. Being decent does not mean being passive. You can be the nicest person in the room and still know what accounts exist. You can want an amicable divorce and still have a clear picture of your financial landscape. In fact, the most constructive, amicable, out-of-court resolutions tend to happen when both people show up informed. Mediation works best when both parties understand the actual picture. What derails it is when one person is operating with information and the other is operating with hope. Oversharing your plans too early. I know this feels counterintuitive, especially if you're someone who values transparency, but there is a meaningful difference between being honest and broadcasting your strategy before you have one. Telling your spouse you are planning to file before you've consulted an attorney, gathered documents, or understood your situation is not honesty. It is premature disclosure, and it can dramatically change the dynamic before you're ready to navigate that dynamic. I'm not saying deceive anyone. I'm saying know before you announce. Using the wrong profession for the wrong job. Your divorce attorney is not your therapist. Your therapist is not your financial advisor. Your best friend is not your legal strategist. I say this with complete respect for all of those people in your life. But one of the most expensive things I see people do in divorce is to use the professional or the person who is most available for the job that requires the right expertise. Lawyers bill by the hour. They are not there to process your grief. Therapists are trained for emotional work. They are not there to evaluate your financial settlement. Your best friend loves you. They are also terrified, worried, and probably not objective. Build your team intentionally. A family law attorney for legal guidance, a financial advisor or CDFA, that's a certified divorce financial analyst for the money side, a therapist for your emotional process, and a divorce coach to tie it all together. I want to spend an extra moment on that last one because I think this is the most misunderstood resource in the entire divorce system. And I wish I had a divorce coach at the beginning of my process. A divorce coach is not a therapist. A divorce coach is not a lawyer. A divorce coach is your strategic thought partner. Think of it this way. Your attorney knows the law. Your CDFA knows the numbers. Your therapist knows your emotional landscape. But who is sitting with you on Sunday night when you're trying to figure out what to prioritize going into next week's mediation session? Who is helping you think through the email you're about to send your spouse that could either open up a productive conversation or blow everything up? Who is helping you organize your thinking so that when you walk into that attorney meeting, you're using that billable hour at its highest and best use instead of venting, repeating yourself, or asking questions a coach could have already answered? That is what a good divorce coach does. They help you become a better participant in your own process, more organized, more emotionally regulated, more credible, more strategic. They help you understand what questions to ask your attorney, what documents to bring your financial advisor, and what conversations are productive versus which ones are emotional landmines dressed up as reasonable conversations. The practical impact of this is enormous. When you show up to meeting with your lawyer, having already worked through your priorities with a coach, you spend less time in circles and more time moving forward. When you show up to mediation, having already stress tested your thinking with a coach, you are less reactive and more grounded. Your attorney does not have to do the emotional handling. Your therapist does not have to do strategic planning. Everyone operates in their lane at the highest and best use, which means your process is faster, less expensive, and less chaotic. Divorce coaching is not a luxury. For anyone navigating a complex process with significant emotional, financial, and strategic states, it is one of the highest return investments you can make. I say that not as someone selling you something. I say that as someone who has watched up close the difference it makes. Believing my lawyer will handle everything. Your lawyer is one of the most important people in this process, but they are not omniscient. They work from the information you give them. They are most effective when their client is organized, responsive, and engaged. The client who shows up to every meeting unprepared, who cannot answer basic questions about household finances, who is operating entirely from emotion, is also the client who pays the highest legal fees and often gets the least effective representation. Not because their lawyer is bad, because information is the raw material of legal strategy. Letting fear delay preparation. And finally, this one, the most human of them all, the idea that if you prepare, you are accepting that the worst is going to happen. That preparation is a jinx, that gathering documents means you're giving up. Preparation is not prediction. It is not resignation, and it is not pessimism. Preparation is the most loving thing you can do for your future self. The cost of not understanding the game. I want to tell you one more story before we get to what you can actually do this week. His name for our purposes is David, 55, married for 23 years, 4 kids, 3 of them adults. One is still in high school. David was what I would describe as emotionally prepared but strategically uninformed. He had done real work on himself. He'd been in therapy for 2 years before his divorce. He had processed the grief, the identity shift, the fear of starting over. He was actually, by the time things got official, pretty emotionally stable. But he had never engaged with strategic layer. He didn't know, for example, that in his state, the date of separation matters for purposes of asset valuation. He didn't know that the vacation home he and his wife owned had appreciated significantly in the 2 years since separation, and that valuation date could affect how the appreciation was treated. He didn't know that his wife had refinanced the vacation home in her name during that period of separation, which had implications for equity and debt that he had not anticipated. He also didn't know that his company was in the process of a buyout that had been in discussion for 18 months, and that his unvested equity could be considered a marital asset depending on how the marriage was deemed to have broken down by the court. His attorney, who he only hired 4 weeks before the settlement talks began, had to scramble to get up to speed. David had done the emotional work. He had skipped the informational work, and he walked into a settlement negotiation emotionally stable and strategically blind. He told me afterward, I thought knowing myself was enough. I knew my feelings. I had done the growth. I didn't realize I also needed to understand the game. Not to play it dirty, just to understand it. I didn't know the rules. Not knowing the rules of the game you are playing is expensive in every domain of life. Divorce is no different. Mindset reset, what this is really about. I want to take a moment before the action items to reframe something. Everything I've said today could sound, if you're not careful, like I'm asking you to become someone you're not, someone cold, someone calculating, someone who treats their marriage like a transaction. That is the opposite of what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is become a better participant in the most significant transition of your adult life. What I'm asking you to do is respect yourself enough to understand your own situation. What I'm asking you to do is protect not just your financial future, but your emotional future by reducing the chaos and the reactivity that comes from being uninformed. Because here's the part that almost never gets said. The people who prepare early, who organize, who engage professionals, who show up informed, they are almost always less angry. They are almost always less reactive. They are almost always better co-parents because they're not in survival mode every time something comes up. Preparation creates stability. Stability creates better behavior. Better behavior protects your kids, your relationships, your reputation, and your future. This is not about winning. It's about not losing. And there is a meaningful difference. So here's what you can actually do this week. Here's your action list. And I want to say this directly. Do not try to do all of this at once. Pick the 3 most urgent items based on your situation and start there. You will notice I am putting the human and strategic support at the top of the list. That is intentional. Your mindset has to be in a productive and forward-looking state for everything else on this list to actually work. Action 1, find a divorce coach. This is first on the list for a reason. A good divorce coach becomes your strategic thought partner for the entire journey. They will help you get organized, help you regulate emotionally, and help you use every other professional on this list at their highest and best use. When you show up to your attorney organized and clear, you spend less time in billable confusion. When you show up to mediation having stress test your priorities with a coach, you're steadier under pressure. Before you do anything else, find someone who can help you think. You don't have to do this alone, and you'll move faster if you don't try to. Action 2, find a therapist. This goes second because your mental and emotional state is the operating system that everything else runs on. If that system is flooded, grieving, and unregulated, the quality of every decision downstream suffers. Therapy is not weakness. In this context, it is performance optimization. You need your mind in a productive, forward-oriented state in order to show up strategically for all of the steps that follow. Find a therapist who is experienced with life transitions or divorce specifically. Start now, not after things get. Action 3, pull your tax returns. Log into the IRS website, create an account if you don't have one, and download the last 3 years of returns. Save them somewhere private. This one action alone will give you a remarkable amount of clarity about your financial picture. Action 4, pull your credit report. Go to annualcreditreport.com. It's free. Look at every account, every balance, every inquiry. Make sure there are no accounts you don't recognize. Note which accounts are joint and which ones are individual. Action 5, open a separate private email account. Use it for any financial or legal correspondence related to your situation. This is basic information hygiene. It has nothing to do with deception. Action 6, download 2 years of bank and credit card statements, all accounts. Save them to a private, secure folder. Cloud storage with a strong password is fine. Action 7, create a simple inventory of all accounts and assets. A one-page document, checking, savings, retirement, investment property, vehicles, business interests. It does not have to be perfectly accurate. It needs to exist. You can refine it as you go. Action 8, track your actual monthly expenses for 30 days. Don't estimate, measure. Use a free app or a simple spreadsheet. You will probably be surprised by some of what you find. Action 9, schedule a 1-hour consultation with a family law attorney in your state. Not to file, not to commit to anything, just understand. What does the process look like? What are my rights? What are the key rules in my jurisdiction? A single hour of legal clarity early is worth thousands of dollars in confusion later. Action 10, consider a consultation with a certified divorce financial analyst. CDFAs specialize in the financial aspects of divorce. They can help you understand what is marital and what is not, what different settlement scenarios actually mean long-term, and where the financial landmines tend to live. This is not the same as a general financial advisor, though your financial advisor may also be helpful. Action 11, if children are involved, start a simple parenting calendar. Note who is doing what, when, keep it factual, keep it consistent. If custody becomes a question, the documented pattern of parenting involvement matters. Action 12, find a divorce coach and a therapist. Yes, I listed these first, and I'm listing them again here as your final reminder. If you did not start there, start here. Both of these professionals exist because the emotional and strategic demands of divorce are real and significant. Together, they cover the 2 dimensions that everything else on this list depends on, your mindset and your strategy. You do not have to navigate this alone, and trying to do so often makes it take longer and cost more. So we're getting really close to the end of today's episode, and I want to leave you with this. Divorce is not the end of your story. It's a chapter transition. And like any significant transition, the people who navigate it best are not the ones who are the toughest or angriest or most willing to fight. They're the ones who showed up prepared, informed, and grounded enough to make decisions they could live with later. Carol didn't have that chance in the beginning, but she eventually did. She did the work, got organized, found her footing, and rebuilt. So did Ari, and so did David. The people in these stories are not cautionary tales. They're evidence of what's possible when you engage, even late, even imperfectly, even afraid. The preparation gap is real, but it's closable. And the best time to start closing it is right now. Not because something terrible is definitely coming, but because you deserve to know your own life. You deserve to show up for this, whatever it becomes, with clarity instead of chaos, with steadiness instead of panic, with dignity that comes from knowing you gave yourself the best possible chance. That is what conscious divorce actually means. It doesn't mean painless. It means intentional. It means eyes open. It means you are present for your own life, even in the hardest parts, especially in the hardest parts. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd ask you to do 2 things. First, share it. Send it to one person who might need it. You might be the reason someone shows up better prepared for the hardest thing they've ever done, and that matters. Second, if you want to support real strategic support, not just information, come find me. My website is www.reclaimandreboot.me. I offer a free 30-minute consultation, and I work with people who are ready to stop reacting and start building. My books, U 2.0, Divorce, A Better Way Forward, and the U Workbook are both available on Amazon.com and can be very helpful. I'm Justin Milrad. This is the Conscious Divorce Podcast. If this episode gave you something, anything, please subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're willing to take 60 more seconds, leave a review. I say this not as a marketing request. I say this because I volunteer a meaningful amount of my time to create this content for people who are going through one of the hardest chapters of their lives. A review helps real people find this show at the exact moment they need it. This is not a small thing. That is someone's trajectory changing. So thank you for that. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful day.